Hello and welcome to the first ever episode of It's Not an Interview. I'm your host, Daniel Olabode. Since this is the first episode of the podcast, I guess I'll talk a little bit about the inspiration behind the podcast. Essentially, I really like talking to people and learning about what they do and who they are, what motivates them, and exploring their passions. There are a lot of people out there who do interesting things and ventures, be it a hobby, a startup, a craft, a skill, anything creative really. Creativity in its entire form inspires me, and I hope that some of the guests may also inspire you with some of their stories. Some of these guests will come with the ideas and beliefs that drive them, as well as their creative drive, and I hope to understand these ideas so I can learn and grow as a person. It may be the case that sometimes as I listen to some of the people who talk, I may fully agree with some of their points. It might be the case that I actually disagree with some of their ideas, but this is not a problem. I think it's quite good to listen to ideas that you disagree with, or things that challenge your perceived notion of reality. We don't really get into much of an argument or disagreement in this, or like a heated debate in this podcast, but I am prepared for future podcasts to talk to people who challenge my ideas, and that was the whole point of starting this podcast, or at least that's part of the reason, in order to challenge ideas. We kind of touch upon this, funnily enough, with today's guest, Kelsey Mohamed, who is working on a startup called Cradle, which we will get into in the podcast. We talk about conflict resolution and the types of mentalities that people have when going into arguments, which can be, on one side, putting your ideas to the test and hearing other people's ideas, coming to a compromise and learning, which is something that I will try and promote in this podcast and in the lives of everyone really, in order to grow as people. Or an alternative, the type of mentality that people can have when going into arguments or discussions can be just throwing out ideas and your ideas and not listening to the types of points that maybe you wouldn't have considered. It's just dangerous, I think, to be stuck in your type of narrative and not really hear other people's points of view, regardless of how much you disagree with them. So yeah, as this podcast develops, I hope to talk to people who challenge my perceived notion of reality, so I can learn and grow, be that by consolidating my ideas and beliefs or challenging them, which may put any perceived notion of reality I have into question. But regardless of that, that's just one aspect of it. The other aspect is to learn and grow from people, learn about their ventures and be inspired by the types of things that people are doing in London and maybe around the world, depending on how this thing grows. This is the first podcast after all. I have no idea what the future holds, but all I can do is be consistent and put out content and see how you, the listeners, perceive it. I'll be very keen on hearing your points and views about this and seeing what direction you feel that this should go in as well. Before we get in, special thanks to Anand Singh and Alex Barrow for helping me with the podcast setup, helping film, and even helping with the coming up with the idea. Doing a podcast is something that we've wanted to do for a while, and I guess just starting will help me gain the experience and the knowledge of how to do this. So also thanks to my brother Yinka for helping me set up with the sound and using the studio. Yinka goes by YinkzzCM, which you can check out his music on Soundcloud. Thanks to Oni for the tracks used in this episode. Links and information can be found in the description if you're watching on YouTube. You can follow Oni on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/OniBeats. after the conversation with me and Kelsey, you can vibe out with some of Oni's tracks that are going to be played at the end of the episode. Our guest for this episode is Kelsey Mohamed, who is developing what she calls a community for the curious, compassionate and creative, which sounds like my type of community. So let's get into it. Tell me about yourself, Kelsey. Why do you think you're cool?
Why do I think I'm cool? That's a whole different thing. I'll tell you about what I do and stuff. You like, essentially, so I have a startup that's called Cradle, and on the surface of it, it's an online magazine type thing. You know, online content, articles, videos, and things, plus live events with workshops and talks. And eventually bigger live events that'll bring in comedy and music as well.
Okay.
But it's more that the concept behind it. So the tagline is, it's a community for the curious, compassionate, and creative. So particularly interested in where those aspects of compassion and creativity intersect. So like particularly art that has some kind of social purpose or is raising awareness for some kind of issue or whatever, like particularly where those connect. But I'm just really interested in creativity and innovation and things, and just like really mainly care about people. So like I'm just interested in people. And the curiosity part is that, like, you know, to be part of this community, you don't necessarily have to be a creative or someone who works in the social sector or something. Yeah. You can just be like, this is really interesting. And also in terms of stuff that we cover, if something comes up that I'm just like, this is really interesting. Yeah. Like, let's cover that as well. That's pretty cool. Yeah, that's kind of the main thing, I guess. I don't know, I could go on about it for ages. Basically, it's kind of... you know, the online content as well. In terms of the community aspect, it's because I want it to be that it's very collaborative. We'll be creating our own original content as well. Like, we've been working on this documentary and stuff. Yeah. What's the documentary about? So that documentary is about social isolation or loneliness, essentially, in London or urban areas generally. And what we did is we... interviewed a bunch of people just in my flat for budget reasons. Yeah. And then also this evolutionary psychologist from Brunel University. Oh, interesting. Which was cool, get some academia in there. What was the academics talking about? So, I don't know. What were the points? Yeah, so he was saying some really interesting stuff that was just ideal for what I wanted, because social isolation is, from an evolutionary standpoint, like, obviously we are social creatures. We are very much community animals. Yeah. So community based, I don't know. But like, we're very social beings. Yeah, we're just like fully social, and we're not really meant to be alone. And social isolation is just as bad for your health, your mental health, physical health, as things like obesity and smoking and things. And you have government initiatives which are stopping us from doing those kinds of things, but there's nothing that encourages you to make quality connections with other people. Yeah. And the kind of what stuff that he was saying was like, you know, Western culture is very individualistic, and particularly in something like London, where it's very expensive to live here. You're probably working really long hours. You're probably underpaid. It takes, you know, you've got to factor in an hour each way if you want to go see your friends, whatever. And so it's very individualistic, and you're not encouraging those connections and that community. And everyone says there's a big lack of community in London. And something that I noticed, basically why we made it, was because I've noticed that, you know, I kind of went through it, and everyone that I know who's moved from Winchester, where I grew up, has experienced it. And then I just meet people every time that I talk about this documentary who are like, yes, I totally know what you mean. But like, you know, you move to London because you're like, this is where everything's happening. You've got such high expectations, and then actually everyone's really unfriendly, and you just sit alone in your flat being like, where do I go? Like, how do I get started? And you know, it's very different from how we grew up. Like, when I was at school in this small town, it was a case of I could just literally like walk into town after school and spot like 5 people that I know. I wouldn't even have to call them or anything, and we would just hang out, and that was like, it was highly social. Like every like spare like afternoon or whatever that I had, I was hanging out with my friends. And then you move to London and it's like, so I'll see you next Thursday. Like you've got to plan it, you've got to organise it, and like no one can afford to go anywhere. No one, you know. So it's just this thing that I noticed was happening, and particularly with young people. So if you Google social isolation, everything that comes up is like about the elderly, which is important, but there's a stigma around young people being like, I don't have enough friends, like I don't know what to do about it. So I decided to, you know.
So for your sake, it was like you were coming I see it as you were going into a new place. So you've developed your friendship connections when you were growing up in Winchester. So you had these friends that you would like, you were friends from birth, or from pretty young. And then you go to this new place. It would be London, which is like there's already loads of people in London. I think like, how's it, like 7 million
or something like there's so many people,
and that is not only a new place to you, but a different type of like behavior,
the whole structure around it.
Exactly.
You know, you've got to factor in that travel, the like money that it costs, like just the whole vibe is very different.
So like do you say that the I guess the effects of social isolation is the same for people who are have lived in London since birth, or like since they were growing up, or is it more linked to people who've moved here?
Well, so we interviewed some people who'd moved here within the last, like, you know, there was one student who'd moved here like a couple months ago. There were a few people who'd moved in the last year or whatever, and we spoke to a couple people who'd lived here all their lives and had, like, even when you move within London, people have had this kind of issue. And also just that, like, you know, that's the thing. If you have something convenient, so something that came up is like people who are part of a church or something, some kind of like organised activity, same with like students or whatever. There's some things that have built-in social groups that you can join, and then some people are like, it's not been an issue for me. But then other people who maybe like you didn't click with everyone on your course, or you don't like get on with the people that you work with, or maybe they're all a lot older than you and in a different like stage of life or something, or like sometimes things happen and then you end up in this isolated situation. I think for it happening in, I don't know, it's like, I don't know, there's that whole thing, like a village outlook is, you know, all your neighbours and everyone's in everyone's business, and there can be downsides to that too, obviously. But then once you put like so many people in one space, we become much more, we're social creatures, but we're also not meant to live in such big groups. So there's that kind of dehumanizing aspect thing that happens as well, where you just stop treating everyone that you walk past as a person, because you're just like, I'm in my zone and I don't know if it's a British thing as well. Like some people I've spoken to have been like, yeah, that sounds like mainly it's British people, like, because we're just like, don't want to talk to each other, don't want to, you know, any of that thing. But I think it's mainly urban.
I've like, from my own experiences from like growing up.
Yeah, because you grew up here. So what did you?
Because like I grew up in London. I grew up. I've always lived in London, but like most of my life I've been in around Nigerian culture. So I've been in, when I was growing up in the church as well. So I had that sense of community, both because our family is quite strong in terms of like in my mom, on my mom's side, we're close with all my mom's sisters and brothers, and
they all live close by as well.
No, they don't live close by, but like
just close to them.
Whenever there's means for us to come together, we try and do that, and we had this perception of trying to have a strong family bond, and then you, on top of that, being all of us being going to church. We didn't go to the same church. Not everyone went to the same church, but the church community that where I grew up in, like you had you did have that sense of community, because like everyone knew each other. Every day you went to when you went to church on Sunday, you would know the auntie that who was the meet and greet person, or you know the usher, but you also know them, not just the usher, just like just by saying auntie, uncle, like they were family. And so I guess in that aspect, I guess
have that community and stuff. And
so
one of the things that Professor was saying as well is that, like, perhaps in Western culture, as most of us, or like largely as a society, we've moved away from religion. Like, people don't, it's not part of everyone's Sunday routine anymore to go to church as it would have been, like, however many years ago. And perhaps part of this individualistic society is definitely, like, the moving away from religion is one thing, but there's not been anything that's come in to replace it. So in terms of that community and stuff, we don't necessarily have a go-to thing that is where we would find, like, that kind of like-mindedness or that shared experience that we're all,
But don't you find that shared experience by just socializing with people who have that shared experience?
Exactly.
So you
have to find your community in different ways, but it's just not necessarily laid out for you like it would have been.
But isn't the power the internet is such a powerful tool? Would you say like people who are connected, people from different points in different parts of the world can connect with other people who have that.
So you can communicate with people who are like really far away and all that stuff. And also if you are isolated, it can also be a good way, like if you live in a rural area, for example, and you feel like you're a bit of a weirdo and just no one in your area is particularly into the same stuff you are, can be a really good way of connecting with people who are into those things. The thing is that also, I wouldn't necessarily say that the internet encourages quality connections with people, because you're still physically distant from them, and we can still, with a level of distance and potentially sometimes anonymity, people also use that to be absolute dicks to each other as well. So, and it's that thing where, like, if you have like 3,000 Facebook friends, are you any less lonely?
True.
If you don't have, say, like 3 actual real life really good friends, like often it's your in-person connections that are actually going to help with that that community thing, even though the internet, I do think, like, can do like amazing things and can give people hope in situations that they wouldn't necessarily. Like, there's this thing called the it's been running for ages, the It Gets Better project, which is like just a YouTube series of videos that, like, now like thousands and thousands of people have made them. Like Obama made one, like loads of people. But what it started as was like a way to reach out particularly to LGBT kids in like rural areas, because they have like the highest suicide rate. And often the situation will be that if you live in a rural area which is particularly not very tolerant, not very like accepting, a lot of these kids, if they're bullied at school and things, like a lot of them give up before they turn 18. And realistically, when you turn 18, that's when you could fucking turn it around. Like, you can get the fuck out of there. Am I allowed to swear on this? Go
ahead.
I've been doing it.
Alcohol. Or get a dildo in here. Let's go.
And do you know what I mean? Like, that can be when, like, all of those things that were keeping you in that situation that wasn't working out very well for you, that can be when you get to go and move to a city and find your group, and like, everything can get better from that moment. So then a lot of people made these videos that were like, I was that kid and now this is what happened in my life. I just held on until that point, and then I got to go and make the life that I want. And I found out that it's not that my life will always be like this, but as a teenager in a very isolated area, it can be that you feel like this is what it's always going to be. This is how people will always treat me. And so the internet, that's something that's really great that's come out of the internet. Like, it's been really effective in a lot of ways. There's been a lot of like teenagers who've looked at that kind of thing and been like, okay, like, I get it. So, there can be good things, and that's a way to connect with people. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's a connection that has been made, even though actually, like, you are just looking at a video that somean like that person doesn't know that you're watching it. But
when I was talking about community among like people on the internet, like I mean that it's true that you're not physically communicating with the people that you see on online, whether it's Facebook or any other like social platform. But and that's a really great way of like getting people out of their isolated spaces and encouraging them.
It means that at least they can see that there's more world out there that's not necessarily like what they see on a day-to-day basis. Like, that can be really great.
And that's one of the ways that I felt from when I was growing up, because like say for example, I like playing games. I like Sonic the Hedgehog. I used to like play a lot of the games when growing up, but not a lot of people. I mean, to my knowledge, when I was in secondary school,
didn't know a lot of people that were into it.
They were into it, and so, but I was a huge fan. It was probably like I would draw him all a lot. Like got to the point where people say like, "Oh, are you gonna marry Sonic when you're growing up?" But yeah, I had such a huge like passion for games and Sonic the Hedgehog, so I would go on these like online forums where he had like just like websites just dedicated to like Sonic the Hedgehog. It was, like,
it's
pretty
just
cool.
all Sonic's biggest fans.
Exactly, that's all coming together.
Yeah,
you
so
get,
it can totally be a great way to, find people who are into the same things as you.
Yeah. So then from there you feel validated because it's like, oh, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one. So like, showing, because we are social beings, like finding that connection, like you were saying before, like that people have to certain things so they don't feel isolated. So they're out of their like those like isolated spaces. Because in London, when you're walking down the street and everyone's so fixated on what they need to do, there's no like sort of space or leeway to like communicate with that.
Not interacting with each other,
But it's probably a Western, not a Western thing, maybe British thing as well. Because when you go to another country, like say Spain or anywhere else, like
people say hello to each other on the street and stuff. In a lot of places, like just walking past someone on the pavement, and they'll be like, "Good morning." But here, it's considered really weird. But I've also met people who are from like various countryside places in the UK, and they feel like that when they come to London as well, where they're like, "Oh, everyone used to be really friendly to me, and here people are unfriendly." So
it's particularly like
a London urban thing. Like something about this city makes us all really unfriendly.
Because
but I think you're overwhelmed. Like to be able to interact with every person that you saw on the tube when you're crammed in to this tin can on your way to work when it's really early and you don't really want to be there anyway. I don't blame them. Do you know what I mean? But
it's easy to like remember everyone's name in the village when there's like 7 people.
Yeah,
but then when you get to like a city when
you're 7 million, it's hard. Gonna, like in an apartment building, there could be like I don't know, 300 people live just in this building that I live in. You're not going to necessarily know all of them.
And it's interesting because you also have that like diffusion of responsibility as well. Because when you're in
accountability and stuff.
Yeah, so when it's even in like a large city where you have lots of people, let's say you would find it that there are more. I would assume that let's say you had a homeless person in a country town, and you had like a homeless person in a city. There are more people that would walk past a homeless man in the city, but a much larger amount would give him money in the village, as opposed to that would what I would presume. I don't really know. And or even just stuff like in Winchester, like I know all the homeless people. Like I wouldn't like we might have names for them or whatever that are like a descriptor, but like the Big Issue man or whatever, because there'll be one person in the town that sells the Big Issue, or like some of them became like characters and stuff. There's some Winchester characters and stuff. I just felt like it's something that we don't particularly talk about when it comes to young people and stuff, so I just wanted to investigate it basically. But it kind of worked out really nicely because a lot of these people that came, because like I said, like it's because we wanted to do as cheap as possible, so it's like we did it in my flat. My friend who's a film student got to rent out all the equipment and stuff like that, but it had ended up creating like a really nice vibe because we weren't in some like fancy studio or whatever. We were just in my living room, which meant that like people would come in, they'd have a cup of tea with us, and then they would sit down and like chat to the camera for like 20 minutes, and they had that moment where like, because everyone else shuts up when the camera's on, and they just get to talk about their emotions for like 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever. And then they it was all about how they were finding it difficult to make friends in London and stuff. But like by the time that they left my flat, we're all friends on Facebook, and we're all like, they're going to come to events and things. We're all in touch still, and they're going to come. I'm going to do a screening out the flat where everyone gets to come and like watch it together. And like they left feeling a little bit like they'd made some friends like while they were there. So it's like, it's really cute basically. I just like really enjoyed that
aspects. I hadn't even thought of that as kind of part of it. I was just busy being like, let's interview some people, and then I was like, oh, actually, like I can make friends with you as well.
How do you like get them to like just let out all of their emotions in that space? Like how is it is it easy for them to just
I think it was interesting as well because we actually ended up with more guys than girls coming, and like guys aren't necessarily like known for coming in and just sharing all their emotions, but also isolation and stuff is like obviously a really big issue for men as well. So I don't know, I feel like Layla was doing most of the interviewing and she's really good, but like because like some of them we'd known personally or some of them we kind of we just took like half an hour or as long as it took to get them comfortable with us, to like just chat with them off camera and like talk about the project and just talk about them. And because we're all young, non-threatening people, do you know what I mean? Like I always look a little bit ridiculous and I'm like, this is my thing. Like people aren't uncomfortable. So, and we were talking about, I would talk to them about my experience and why I wanted to make the film. So then I think that got them in the right mindset to then just actually share what they really felt. And I think almost as well with having the camera on, it kind of will make you feel a little bit like, because if you give short answers, that's more awkward. So you're going to keep talking. I don't know.
Yeah, fair.
So that, I think that's how it worked. But I don't know, it turned into a bit of a therapy session a couple times, which was really cool.
And it's cool because like when you pour yourself out, when you pour yourself out to someone, then you actually like open the door to like you're actually like giving open the door to their soul so you can actually see them and genuinely, so you then, but it's natural to like have a connection with those type of people because then you can, it's a
vulnerable situation to have come into anyway, to come and talk about how you find it difficult to make friends or whatever, like,
and then trust is bound to like be there, and that's part of that. Would you say that's part of what a good community needs to like give them that level
it's
of
about
trust?
Being able to be open to whatever it is that they're saying. So even if you can't agree with it, or if you don't understand it straight off the bat, you've got to be able to be like, but why is it that you do feel like that and things. And I think I don't know, so one of the other things that I got involved in recently is this other like activism group, and the way that they run their meetings is so interesting because they anti like hierarchies and stuff. So there's no leader. Each meeting will have two facilitators who are kind of running the meeting, but it'll be two different people every time you have a meeting. Yeah. And they do everything by consensus, not by a majority, which means they will sit and discuss and compromise until everyone can agree. I've never been in a situation like that. It's always like people are competitive. You're going to bulldoze over whoever it is that you don't agree with because you're like, my idea is the best. Like, that's usually how things go.
People put their egos in this
exactly. Whereas this, like, you're not allowed to interrupt. We have different like hand signals for different kinds of points you want to make, and like it's very measured and calm and very respectful. And so if someone is concerned about something, usually it's not for no reason. So it'll be like, why is it? If everyone else, like if we've almost reached consensus, like there's just one person who's still being like, oh, I don't know, why? Like, let's talk to them about why, and not do it in an aggressive, like, we're trying to change your mind. We'll be like, what is it that's concerning you about this? And then if they have a valid point, then we'll compromise until, do you know what I mean? So it's super interesting. I really love to bring some of those aspects into my business and just into my life.
Exactly. Because whenever there's conflict, it's always because there's a perspective and that you're not seeing, or the other people, the two people who are having an argument are not seeing the perspective that the other person trying to say.
What is it that you're either not understanding, that you're afraid of, that you're anxious about? Like what is it that's holding you back from like agreeing to this thing or whatever? Like, and so rather than like plowing over people,
and understand it. Like, why is it that you think this way? And then when you understand it, then you can fully have a then you can have a conversation about it, and like then we can compromise, because often it's not because of just absolutely no reason that people are thinking these things. So I don't know. So that's been really interesting, just as an experience to be a part of that. Because I've just I'm used to having to compete to have my voice heard, and I've had to like,
push myself down a little bit so that I'm not being too much like, I'm leading this thing now. Like, you know, I have to actually just be like, okay, no, we're all actually equals. Everyone is just as important. And that's what we should be doing. Do you know what I mean? And so, yeah, compassion is just one of the things that's like really interesting to me at the moment, and really like seems to be what is at the core of a lot of issues at the moment, like you know, a lack of it.
But would you say in all aspects of like of Cradle, you have that let's say horizontal hierarchy of responsibility, or would you say that there are other means
it
where
just
like
depends on
like how,
I think the idea of the community, well, I mean, the thing is it's still my thing, but like only because I feel like in terms of a business I probably will have to like have like someone who's like directing it, but the community aspect is very much to do with the fact that like I want it to be that I want to be going and like I've just recruited like some writers and stuff, and we're going to be finding out about different initiatives, different artists, different like people who combine the two, and be interviewing them. But the point is that like particularly with the creative people and stuff, but like we're going to go and like make a connection with them. We're going to go and we're going to get to know them a bit, and they will be someone that we are then involved in. We find out what it is that they want to be working on. So a lot of it will be then that what skills do you have and what are you interested in? We're thinking about working on this project. Would you like to work on that? Or like, oh, you were looking for someone to help you with this film or whatever. We know this guy who's, you know, we've just interviewed this person, and like try and like make it as collaborative as possible.
Connecting the dots, networking.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And like, so whether it's like we're, you know, doing features on just like what they're working on, or whether it's that like either we have an idea or they have an idea that they're like, let's collaborate on something. I want it to be like this massive pool of creative and compassionate people who will all work together on different projects and things. Because like I said, like the website will have some of our original content on, in which case it'll be like I've come up with an idea for some kind of like educational video or something, like, you know, put it out there on like, I'm hoping to like put together like a Facebook group just of like all these kinds of people, where it'll be that we've personally vetted them in some way because we've actually met them. It's not just an open like whatever. It'll be that like we've personally interacted with these people, and they can put it out there and be like, looking for an animator for this video, who's up for it? And you're providing work for them in terms of like something else that they can create. And also it'll be like hosted on our, you know, it works for everybody. But it is just this collaborative idea that I'm really interested in.
But it's a charity, so in a way, like what happens when
it's not a charity.
It's not a charity. No. Okay, so it's a limited
company.
But for now, we will have volunteers. Like some of
so I have interns.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, basically because we don't have any funding yet, everyone is kind of just doing what they can with the flexibility that they have. But obviously, like once we make some money, I will be dividing that up as much as I can to.
Yeah, it's a startup.
Yeah,
so
exactly. We haven't, but I'm working on all that stuff.
Yeah,
but it is exactly. And because like, and you know, that's the thing is like a lot of people are freelance or they're students or like whatever, so they're happy to help. And that's the thing is hopefully that being part of the community as well is that kind of. It's you're being part of this whole thing, so it's also going to lead to other things for you, like in terms of collaborations and projects and stuff. But I don't know, it should be interesting, and I don't know, I think it'll be cool. And then so these events that we're going to do as well, so at the moment I'm setting up like little workshops and stuff around North London to see like what works and things, and then eventually the idea is to have like events that are like a day festival, where you have talks and workshops and things in the day, and then you have comedy and music in the evening, like have a bit of party at the end. So that it's a bit more engaging and also a bit more social, because you've been forced to interact with people because you're having these discussions and you're doing these interesting things, but it's still in like a fun like pub environment, like you're drinking, you're having a fun time, but it's just a little bit less like you just go and just like lose your mind on drink and drugs and only speak to the people that you came with. Like the idea is for it to be a bit more social and
do the drugs with people that you didn't come with.
Do you know what I mean? Share them around. And and hopefully, because we will have made all these connections with these creative people and these different initiatives and all that kind of thing, they will also come to the events, they will appear at the events, like performing or creating things for it or talking on panels. Like, the idea is to then also be able to have, like, physically get the community together as well. Essentially because, as well, so my background was I used to do gigs. Yeah. I used to, like, book them for my bands with my old company. And the key to promotion, really, if you're not about fame and if you're about actually just, like, putting on a good gig, which most promoters are not, if you're interested in putting on a good gig, what you want is, like, and it's unsigned bands or whatever. So, like, if you're out there flyering, like, just handing out flyers to strangers and they don't see any names they recognise, like, they're not just going to come to that because someone just handed them a flyer. But if you went round to, like, all of your friends first, but also, like, all of the local businesses and went and asked people and actually spoke to them and you were like, these are some bands that I'm like, what kind of music are you into? These are some bands that I'm putting on. You start building your community by personally talking to people and being like, when your shift ends, like, maybe you should come check this out. I can give you a discount. I can do whatever. Like, you actually talk to people personally and make a connection. They're more likely to come. And so the idea with this as well is that, I'm an events person. I wanted to just be putting on events, but I was going to do that and I was going to do this podcast as well. And then it was like, well, we're going to have a website. Well, we may as well put articles and videos and animations and all this other stuff on the website, which in itself is kind of a whole venture. But it's also just a massive promotional technique to then get people to physically come and see us, and come and participate in the real world as well. But having stuff online means that obviously you can be constantly creating content and staying in people's minds so they don't forget about you and things, and making those connections, going and meeting these people and actually them having a reason to come and see the events that you're putting on or to participate in them, rather than just blindly tweeting out to everybody all the time, like, come to this, you've never heard of any of them, but come anyway. Like, it doesn't work, and it's not a good way to get people who actually give a shit. Whereas I want people to come because they actually want to be part of it. And it means that the bands that I put on can just be about people will enjoy this. It doesn't have to be that I'm, like, pretending that I think they're the next big thing or whatever. Like, it'll be that they want to be a part of this thing, want to come and play this specific event, and so it all links, and it all came from, like, me having done these events before and then just kind of developing as a person and having broader interests and realising that, like, I wanted to do something a bit more engaging and actually create some kind of community and get people to connect with each other, because I just think that's missing.
When you're going out and I guess showing people that you're come to these events because these not because I want you to come, but maybe because these are events that I think you'll be interested in. Are you just going into, let's say, the local barber or like
aside from the people that we've already, like, worked with in some way, or, like, the big community that we will build, it is it's about, like, by having things like talks and workshops, automatically it'll be a case of, like, flat out, like, you might be interested in these things. These things are really interesting. I think you should come to this. And also, it is about, like, local businesses. Type of talks as well. Exactly. So, like, if it's, like, these kinds of topics and things. Something else that I'm really interested in is the idea of I'm really into the, like, tricking people into educating themselves with art, basically, or, like, distraction with art, and then, like, bam, you learn some stuff. Like, I basically, like,
videos.
No, not like that, but like if I were able to, like, package up an event that had some talks and stuff and some music, and whatever other performing arts and things, I could package that up and take it on a tour to, say, like, rural areas where they have less of this kind of stuff going on anyway. But say that, like, because this is the thing, like, a lot of, like, say, the feminist events that I go to, everyone in the audience is already a feminist who's already, like, oh, I, like, work for this organisation, or I'm the head of this, and, like, they're already, like, they know all the stuff already. And so preaching to the converted, like, isn't what I'm interested in. I want to be reaching people, like we were saying, like, try and understand why people feel the way that they do, and by bringing some of these topics up on a more basic level to some of these areas where they're not necessarily exposed to all these kinds of things. But the idea is that I would like it if I could get some artists some like musicians and stuff who are already popular in some of those areas, get some like grime artists, like whatever, and get them to appear at the events. So, but you've bought a ticket for the whole day?
Yeah.
And maybe you're only interested in the dude playing last, but you bought a ticket for the whole day. It's at your local pub where you'd be anyway on a Saturday. Maybe you'll go to some of the talks, do you know what I mean? Maybe that artist appears on one of the panels or whatever. Like, that kind of power of, like, there's one name that I recognise that I'm interested in, but I've paid for the whole package. And so I'm interested in that kind of thing.
How do you get that person to be interested in
well,
the
that's the
talks
thing,
then? Because
is it's not forcing them to, you know, like...
But would you are the talks going to be presented in the ways that it's like, this
It's
is one
accessible
thing,
to them.
that here's a grime artist or whatever genre it is, or here's a talk about feminism. Like, how is it, are they two separate things, or how do you make the link that, so people who maybe would have gone to the maybe
well, you
the
don't
gig,
have to, I mean, yeah, so that's the thing, is like, it depends on the content of the talk and the type of music and
of
things.
course.
So
That's
like
very
each
different.
event is going to be kind of different, but you know, it's a case of, like I said, like if that artist is like, because I don't know, if that artist, a lot of musicians are also fairly political and things, and if there's something that they've mentioned that they particularly care about in their music or whatever, maybe they'd like to appear on a panel or whatever, in which case that person would totally show you up to that. Do you know what I mean? Like if Childish Gambino was also like at a talk or whatever, you'd also be like, exactly, a Carla, like whatever, like you would definitely go. But also just a case of, you know, they might look at the program and be like, none of this interests me at all, and they might not come to any of that. It might show up in the evening, or maybe like one of them might be interesting or whatever, and they might like catch the end of something else. Like, you know, there's a flexibility to it, because I don't want to be forcing people, but I want it to be accessible to the point where like, so it's not like the same kinds of talks necessarily that I would do in London for a more like an audience that's more like already professionals in that field. Like it would have to be like, here's the basics of this thing or whatever. But also like, I don't know, there's other ways of doing it and things. So like you can put on a concert with some kind of like, say, North African music or whatever, and then invite along a professor from SOAS or something, and like have them feed in some facts about Syria or whatever, and the culture and the music around that place, like somewhere like that where the media like only shows you one side of a culture or something, and we don't necessarily hear anything else about it. And maybe like, you know, like things like that where you can just kind of give them a new perspective to see things in. In a non-threatening environment. You're not in a classroom and you're not being like told you have to like care about this thing or pay attention to this, but it was like, well, you're at this concert, this person's just happened to say some things for 20 minutes as well, or whatever. Like
it's like a hub where different sort of events are in, and you can pick and choose where you want to go to.
And if you're in a place where there's not that much going on anyway, like, and then this thing comes to town where at the very least, also I feel like this has just occurred to me, but maybe like some trust or some kind of intrigue is going to be created by the fact that if these people who brought along this event, they've picked someone who's playing that you like, so already you're going to be slightly on their side, or something's going to be interesting about it, because you're like, well, they already know about this thing that I do like, so maybe, do you know what I mean, like connecting with people through things like that, where you can just kind of be like, I don't know, I expressed that badly, but you know what I mean, like
it'd be cool.
A kind of a thing where you're like, okay, well, I wouldn't have thought of being interested or like going to any of these things, but the fact that this person that I really respect is performing at this, maybe it is worthwhile or whatever, you know, like small things like that might just make it a little less threatening, and it being us going to them as well, not being like, oh, everyone who lives in these kinds of areas or has these opinions has to come to like the Women of the World Festival at the South Bank. Do you know what I mean? Like it would be that you're going to them in rural areas and like to the main places where they would go to stuff anyway. So
I see.
That's the scheme. That's like long term, but like
that's a long term. That's a long term idea of where you want to take things. Currently, you have like you have the interns who are writing for you.
So I have the writers. I have the film crew. I've got animators. I've recruited a couple illustrators. And then there's the people that we're actually going to do the features on, who are like the various different like kind of initiatives, or like things like just where you can bring up a discussion of these like compassion related things, like these social causes or whatever. So like there's this guy who's a sustainable carpenter. Go take pictures of his workshop, talk to him about his work, but use it as a jumping off point to talk about sustainability as well. And a big part of it as well is like it's normal people. Like it's not that I'm chasing after celebrities to have them talk about these things or whatever. It's people and their normal perspectives and why these things mean anything to them and stuff. So it is that community aspect, because it's not about trying to get people who are on a certain level and already have a certain amount of like influence. It's people who are like working on the ground and stuff. Same with the people on my podcast in terms of like social workers and support workers and people who work in those fields directly, rather than always like in the media and stuff. Like the people that we hear about these things from are the people making the policies or whatever. So we don't necessarily hear about the day-to-day what's going on.
I realize that I've noticed, at least in my life, that I know for the last year I knew more about American politics than I did about what's going on here, and like there's not a lot of avenues for like a variety of political talk in the UK. I mean I've noticed, like I try to follow like LBC just to hear like the different like Majid Nawaz or he's the main one I listen to, like when but besides, there's not like a huge variety, really. No,
not of like things that are particularly well, whatever the word is, I don't know, like spread, like that you would hear of, you know.
Yeah.
But that's why I think podcasts have been so interesting as a concept, because it is this long form, like unrestrained, just discussion.
Yeah.
And I just don't. Getting pretty meta talking about podcasts on a podcast, but like, do you know what I mean? Like, I think it's been a really good way of people being able to have these discussions, because anything on TV or radio or whatever is so time sensitive and so edited and scripted often that like,
all right, we're going on a break.
Yeah, exactly. After this break, like,
so I'm going to cut you off there. Like, hold up.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? So like, I don't know, and you only ever have maximum, what's a long interview on TV? Maybe like 7 minutes.
Even 8 minutes. Like 3 of those minutes, you're just like trying to introduce them to people.
Yeah, exactly.
Showing a piece of their work. Oh, you were in this film. Let's give 2 minutes to show the film. It's like the worst clip of the film, and then you just pause back to the guy. He's like, what the fuck is going on? Anyway, also, one of the things I wanted to ask you about was like you come about the interns that you're having now, because you're going to expand into you want to expand into the things like animation and filming and having writers and doing like all these different type of events
all
and
these
music gigs
and stuff.
Though, like you currently have writers who will be making.
So they're kind of doing the journalism side.
Do you see what's your next few steps? Like, what type of people are you currently looking for? Yeah.
What are we looking for now? This is the thing. Is like I feel like we can never have too many of any of them, because if it's people who are just willing to like, oh, I've heard of this thing, I really want to write a thing about it, like this initiative or this like thing that's going on. I'm open to them. I also don't know, with the writers, for example, I don't know how like frequently they'll be able to like, so I'm happy to basically have like loads of people on call for like because I also said to them like, there's going to be times where maybe I've like heard of something that I'm like, oh, it would be cool if you went and covered this, but I'm not going to make them cover anything that they're not passionate about and that they're not personally interested in, because their passion will show in their work, and if they feel like it's a chore, then I don't want them to do it. And so that's why I want to be able to like put it out there of like, we're doing this project, who wants to collaborate on it, and like, so the wider the net that we have, like the better. And that's why then there'll be more like freelance like who sometimes do things for Cradle or whatever, rather than them all being like full-time stuff, because I would like it if everything has its own artistic element, and so the more like animators and the more illustrators and things, like even if every article has like a little illustration with it or whatever, the more different artists that can create those, the better. Do you know what I mean? So because it is, every time we're still showcasing that artist's work as well. It's not like it's just about us.
But what happens in the situation where you say, for example, you have the events where you could talk about feminism, and maybe you have like a writer or an artist who feels strongly, maybe like I'm an intersexual feminist, and I have these beliefs, and I'll put that in the work that I show. Maybe you have another writer who's not a feminist, but maybe it could be to a complete extreme. It's just like hates women as well, or maybe
probably won't hire any of those people.
Or maybe to the sense that maybe a completely different,
but just a different,
like a
view.
liberal mindset, or like have a conflicting view with any point. It could be feminist. It could be like anything. Like what happens in that state? Like, how do you tackle that?
The writers themselves, they don't need to particularly, like, the thing you write about what it is that you're passionate with. The thing is, like, obviously, like, because there's the values of Cradle. If they then write something about how they hate women or something, I'm probably not going to publish that. So but in terms of, I don't know if I fully understand what you're asking, but
I mean more to say, like,
it's more that when things come up, I'll be like, oh, this is a sustainability thing. Hey, like, whoever, like, I know that you're big on the sustainability stuff. So, like, some of the people that I've got so far is one who's, like, really into, like, the performing arts and social causes around, like, how they combine those and things. And, like, with that, like, immersive theatre thing that I did a while ago, where it brought in, like, an anti-austerity message and a political thing into this immersive theatre thing. She's really interested in that kind of thing, and she's also really interested in feminism and stuff. It's another one who's really interested in sustainability. And so, like, there's different people have different interests and different specialties, so they'll probably cover the things that they are interested in, all within still, like I said, not the whole preaching to the converted thing. It still has to be that, like, it is a measured, like, rational and compassionate way of looking at these things. So it can't be, I'm not going to have someone on the other hand who writes a thing about veganism that's like, everyone needs to be vegan, otherwise you're scum. Like, I also wouldn't have someone who's so extreme on that level. Whereas if someone were to say, these are the pros of veganism and this is why it means something to me, and this is how I became a vegan, happily host that.
Okay, fair enough. Just giving
does that make sense?
So you're this is, like, again, it's perspectives, like, you're just giving them a window into that way of thinking. You're not saying this is the way you should.
Not saying you have to do this. It's just a case of, what is it that people feel about things? And I think that's a really important part of it, is that and also, it's that kind of overwhelmingly, it's going to be more positive than it is, like, there's so much bad news out there. It's going to be more about, like, what are people passionate about when it comes to these social issues and stuff, people who are trying to do something about it, and, like, like, it's not just all negative stuff. I want it to be quite a positive thing.
You were saying that in your, and from your experience doing events, you used to, like, host a variety of events where you had, like, guests ranging from, like, neuroscientists to, like, prostitutes coming, or something like that. Or was that your previous work in podcasting, or some sort of TED
that's what I'm going to have on the podcast and stuff. And also, I'd like to do some of the talks and things with, like, a variety of different, like, things. I think basically with the podcast as well, it's all just, I think it's all storytelling. Storytelling is the least threatening way of putting information out there and being able to influence people, but in a non-threatening, non-aggressive manner, because you tap into people's empathy and compassion, and they, like, will often come around to how you're thinking or whatever, because they will then see your perspective. And so a lot of it is just about, like, the person personally and what it is that and how they arrived at those conclusions and things.
So that, like, your showing, like, for example, when the reason why I mentioned the differences, like, in occupation.
So it's all about humans.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter that their occupation is this or that, but it's exactly who they are as a person.
Yeah, exactly. So we have like from neuroscientists to so I met that this lady who works as a stripper in Bristol, and I met her at Boomtown, but she was there doing a talk about like sex work and stuff, because that's also now partly what she does, is some kind of activism in terms of talking about sex work and just being out there and being like, look, I'm okay. I quite like doing this and stuff. But she was just talking about herself, you know? She wasn't being like, everyone should do it. And she wasn't saying that no one should do it and there was no shoulds. It was just, everyone should leave me alone. Yeah. You know, that was what it was. It wasn't that like anything about anyone else. And so it's that kind of thing that, fair play. Mm-hmm. Like, it's your life and everyone has their own experiences and their own reasons for whatever, you know? There's also like, I don't know, gonna get derailed on the sex work thing, but like, you know, there's plenty of jobs that I wouldn't do. I wouldn't be a doctor, but that doesn't mean I think being a doctor should be illegal. Do you know what I mean? Because I wouldn't like to do injections on people. Doesn't mean I think like no one should do it. So just because you can't understand something doesn't mean that someone else isn't totally justified. Yeah, I don't know. Compassion. It is. Yeah, it's just about trying to understand people and like. There is always a reason. I am kind of the belief anyway that like if you could do the maths, you could probably predict like anyone's actions, if that makes sense. So I think that like we are a sum of all of our experiences and all of our genetics and like everything. And if you could manage to like figure out all of that, you'd be able to like that. You know, like nothing just happens like out of. And like nothing, you know, it's not just that.
It's always a reason for something.
Exactly. You didn't just like think that for no reason. You didn't act that way for no reason.
You don't think there's something like there's a case for spontaneity and like random events
and free will? Yeah. Not necessarily. Do you know what I mean? I kind of feel like if you could figure it out, I think like that's the thing, is it seems spontaneous because it's so complicated. Mm-hmm. It's so complicated. Like I don't expect someone to be able to do that, but I think like you would be able to. I think everything like matches and like, you know, develops into a, I don't know,
even though like even people's lives like in a way, because even everyone is born into a unique situation. No one, even people's identity, even people's
but that's what I mean, as an individual, like so everyone's they'll all be different and things, they'll all be individual, but for that individual have, like, you would be able to figure it out. I think.
We still have operate by an operating system which is the human consciousness and the way we the human mind. So even though we have the different like we start in these different positions and we have these different experiences, we're still humans. The way we process.
Exactly. That all adds up to whoever it is that you are. Yeah. Like so, and who you are is, I don't know, that predicts like how you will react in all situations. Do you know what I mean? Like you can take it back to like anytime like someone argues in a certain way, well probably like they saw their parents like deal with conflict in that way, and like, but also it'll be that like, you know, all these other things will have influenced it as well, and like as well as like their natural serotonin levels or like whatever, like there would be like a whole formula you could figure out and you'd be able to predict like what people are going to do, I reckon. But if you it's true, like if you truly know someone and you know the way they are, you start to know what
there are predictive factors that you can put into play. Like I know how this person will respond to this sort of stimulus, so
exactly.
As long
and
as
sometimes when you're like worried about having a conversation with someone, like you're predicting what it is that they'll say back to you and stuff. You're playing that conversation in your head of like, oh, but then they'll say this, and then when they'll, you know, like we do it all the time.
You have to, like, in a way it's it's a natural thing. You want to, it's your way of keeping getting your sense of things. Like you need, if you truly know someone, then it allows you to navigate that predictive mindset a bit easier, because you have a lot more information to deal with.
About the context of that person and stuff. Because you wouldn't necessarily, because those predictions wouldn't necessarily be, you know, what I mean is like they wouldn't necessarily be based on logic. Like you wouldn't be like the logical thing for that person to do, you know, like because we're not perfect, they'll do the thing that they are made up to do.
Yeah, because it's still like it's what your perception is of that person.
Yeah,
like, you don't
exactly.
know
so you don't actually know, like, you know, so it's not that like this plus this, as far as I can see, it means that they'll do that, when like not necessarily. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so
like, because I think that this person is like this, because I think Kelsey like loves football, and then she's
as soon as I say this, she's gonna exactly.
As soon as she's always going to talk about Arsenal when
exactly.
this conversation, and then I have not to my that's what I have, but I know like, but in real life, like your interest in football is like
exactly. And on
different.
that day, maybe something else happened that meant that like I was too busy thinking about something else, or like maybe I don't like talking about football with certain types of people because someone made me feel bad about it one time or whatever. You know, like there'll be like loads of other like things interplaying with stuff. So it'd be hard to like actually predict things, but I reckon the maths is there if you could do it. If you could do it. But basically though, I think that's the thing, is like when it comes to understanding people whose point of view you don't agree with, it didn't happen in a vacuum. Like there'll be a reason that they think that.
And once you, and if you, like you said before, it's that think tank. Once you understand that person's point of view, then progress can happen.
Exactly.
You can then figure out, okay, I understand your point of view, you've understood my point of view, even we may not agree, but we can come to a conclusion, or we can come to a compromise and then move forward. Because when you're just shouting at each other, you're not listening. You're just like, let me put my point across, and I don't care what your point is. You're when you're shouting, or when you're in that sense type of conflict, you're not your goal is not to hear that person's point of view. Exactly. It's winning.
We get competitive and we just want to win. We want to change their mind, and we want them to stop thinking that thing. And it's like that's not how it works. Some of the workshops that we want to do, a lot of them are what I'm calling just kind of like basic human skills, which are things that we aren't taught but that we all need to be better at. So like, for example, having this woman on my podcast who's a social worker and stuff, but some of the workshops that she's put on before are things like listening skills and things. So it'd be like just an interesting thing to get some people to come and be like, you know what, like, I don't know. And then I went away and was reading about it, and it was like, you know, they did some study on like 8,000 professionals and people, and like pretty much all of them were like, I'm as good at listening as I could be. Then they also thought that they said they were all as good or better than their colleagues at listening. And it was like, but if there's an average listening level, you can't all be above average. Do you know what I mean? And like a band, like very few of them thought that they needed to work on it in any way. They were just like, I'm really good at this. And like in actuality, what we do a lot of the time, I don't know, I was reading about like active listening, and there's certain things that like you can do specifically to be a good listener and things. And so I was thinking like doing some workshops where you could like work on that kind of thing. Conflict resolution would be a really good one. Like stuff like that, where it's stuff that we all come up against on a daily basis and in our normal lives, whether it's at work or at home or whatever, in all our interpersonal relationships, but we don't like take any direction on how to do them. We just think like, oh, I just need to do it like this or whatever, because this is how I'm naturally reacting or whatever. But we can train ourselves to be more compassionate and be better at these things. And I don't know, one of the things with like conflict that I always find, like, you know, people do it in different ways, and that's fine as well, but like in terms of like arguments in relationships and stuff, like I have some friends who are able to say like the meanest things to each other in the heat of the moment of being angry, and be able to then write it off and be like, well, I know you were just saying that because you're angry. I know that you didn't mean that, like, you know, whatever it is, like I never liked you in the first place or something, you know, where it'd be like, what?
You didn't take it personally.
And they managed to not take it personally, whereas like I always have like a system of like, I refuse to have like any kinds of like insults or any kind of like, I'll be like, let's talk about the actual thing that's bothered you. Don't just be like, you're being a dick, because that's not productive to me. Like it's just insulting and it's not helpful. And so it's things like that where it's like different people do it in different ways, but there's definitely like constructive ways that won't necessarily leave you scarred after the resolution, or won't leave you like doubting things or regretting things that you said or whatever. There's ways to try and like come to a peaceful resolution, because it should never be about just the fact that you're angry. If there's a problem, you should be wanting to resolve it. You know, it's about solving the problem, not just talking about how you're pissed off about it. Some people do have that stage, because when there's someone shouting, or when someone is at in the heat of the moment, or just
having to like push their like what they believe to be true, their agenda, then there's not really a resolution at that point. That you're always like,
it's already escalated at that point, like, and they've probably already crossed the line.
Yeah,
like.
But I feel that in some cases, some people, it can be avoided. Though there are people more quick to escalate things. They can easily, let's say, okay, I'm going to take this to level 2, and like just to make sure that you hear.
Yeah, and often it's like a strategy, use intimidation and use your loud voice to change that person's mind.
You don't agree with me? What?
Exactly.
Okay.
I will just threaten you and make you feel small until you agree, The reason you agree is because you're lesser than me, you're an idiot, you're whatever. Well, that's a way to, do you know what I mean? It's a way to push that person down, and then they'll agree with you because it's like, oh, well, I have to. Or they will just, completely recede because they have been, it's a dominance thing and it's power. And if you just use your power to make people follow you, regardless of actually having like asked them really what's up with them, or like to actually like meet them halfway in any way, then like you're just being a tyrant. Like.
I genuinely think it's the case in a lot of times where, like, when you are in that position, it can be like, oh, I'm going to use my dominance to intimidate, but it's that genuinely that's a tactic because of the belief that I can't believe you cannot see this. Like,
it's the frustration.
It's like it comes off like, even though you
totally,
could,
and I've experienced that.
Like even though like that person who's frustrated could be wrong, like they genuinely believe that. How can you not see that this is clearly this is the only way that you can do this?
It'll often be out of frustration.
Yeah, and then when the red mist is there, like you until the red mist like clears off, then you can see now I'm listening, I can see the other path that could have taken.
But also, how often in those kinds of situations where if it's that like you're so angry because someone's not seeing your point of view or whatever, like how much of that do you think comes down to often like your insecurity? You're frustrated because your thoughts aren't being validated. Yeah, like what if I'm wrong? Like you're scared. You do not want to be wrong. Like if I'm wrong, you're so worried that they're not. Like why that person agreeing with you has become so important that it's got you into that state. Do you know what I mean? Because it reflects badly on you. Because if you haven't convinced them, like if your thoughts are wrong.
If you're wrong, your entire way of thinking has to change, and we're scared of change.
And we're so afraid of that. Yeah, and we're so like defensive of it. Do you know what I mean? And so I think that's a big part of why people get into these arguments in the first place. They're just like they're invested in their idea of themselves and the fact that they are right. That's that it's them being right, which is what's important to them, and their sense of identity or whatever. Like I'm smart, I am this, whatever. And so if someone doesn't come around to your point of view, that's threatening because then maybe you're not as good as you thought you were or whatever. Or maybe they've seen that you're not as good as you try to make people think you are.
I think Jen, because our way of living are like the way we live, and we are very fragile beings, like
insecure little children.
Yeah, like no matter like who we are, like in life, like
everyone's incredibly insecure
because we rely on things, that we rely on our senses in order to gauge the type of reality that we live in, even though like we know that some like our senses aren't completely accurate. This is what we need in order to
we're aware that we all have shortcomings, so you kind of just don't want to be the one with the most shortcomings. You know what I mean? You still want to be at the top of the pile or whatever, and like you don't want people to see the flaws that you are most worried about and stuff. We're all, it's that whole thing where it's like, if you can convince people that you are a certain type of person, then you get to live in a world where you are that type of person. You know, whether you actually are on the inside or not. Like, people will treat you like that, so then you're existing like you are. So it's, how people perceive us is incredibly important to how we can then like live our lives or whatever.
Because whoever we are in life, you create, whether it's let's call it a fiction, you create this fiction about I am this person, I'm Daniel, I do this, I do that. We have
our own narrative,
exactly,
our own understanding of who we are.
And we forge that narrative based on our experiences and based on the things that we like. We say I do this, I do that, and I was told that I'm the smartest in the room, so I am clearly the smartest in the room. And if
then someone knows more than you, and suddenly you're not the smartest person in the room.
My narrative is wrong. No, that can't be right.
Exactly.
And there must be something wrong with
crumble.
you. Yeah, and then
freak out about it.
Whereas whereas naturally, at every single point in our lives, we are always changing, we're always evolving as people.
We're all a work in progress.
Every single day, every minute, like you're learning something new. If it's a moment where
we should be open to that change, and we should be open to accepting that we're flawed and that we will get things wrong, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But I think that's the thing, is we also need to stop like shaming each other and ourselves and things when we do get things wrong or when we aren't perfect. Like when someone, you know, if someone does have a perspective that like the other people in the room don't agree with, we should be better at not yelling at them about it and stuff, and actually try and figure out why they feel that way and things like that. But, and if you can't change their mind, we should, you know, I'm talking to myself now, should be better at like leaving it be. But, you know, it can be difficult.
What sort of like points are like a no-go? Okay, I cannot agree with someone on this. I will not hear what you have to say. Or is that the sort of, do you ever have that like hard line with any topic?
I mean,
or any conflict, or maybe some conflicts that
I don't think it's not that I won't hear what they have to say. It's just that they have to be open to me contradicting them as well. Like, so it has to go both ways. Like, if you have a viewpoint, because I will justify my viewpoint, but if they can't justify it, and if people do hide behind like, oh, it's just what I believe or whatever, that isn't good enough for me, and I will want to know why they believe it. But I don't know, no-go things. I mean, there's things that like.
That's really infuriated you.
I mean, the things that really infuriate me are people who just like won't. I don't know. I mean, I do, but no, I don't know. Something that like I've realised, for example, is that like I feel with a lot of the equality stuff that I'm interested in and like women's rights and stuff, is that when I'm in a room or I'm talking to someone about it, and they kind of roll their eyes or whatever, and that's stopped bothering me now because I know that I'm right. Like I feel so sure that like the aspects of it that I have like thought so thoroughly about now and read so many things and like talked to so many people about and things that like I feel that they are valid. And so when someone just dismisses it straight away because they won't even like, that no longer like makes me feel like embarrassed to be a feminist or any of that stuff. Do you know what I mean? Because I actually know, like I feel secure now in that thought and those thoughts about that stuff. So
so what are the things that they're rolling their eyes at? Like what?
So like if I had a friend who was talking about how who was talking about like I don't know, we were talking about the difference in online dating and stuff, and how he was like, I would rather just be able to just first message be like, yo, do you want to get a drink? And he said that about 9 times out of 10 that doesn't work. And I was like, well, because often for women, particularly with meeting people online, they need to have vetted you a little bit to make sure that you're not a murderer. And he was like, women don't think like that. I was like, yes, they do. Like, maybe they don't think of the word murderer, but there'll be a just in case, or there'll be a, you know, there's a fear. The fact that there's fear there. The fact that we are aware that when you're meeting a stranger from the internet, you want, also, on the other side of that is probably she's getting, like, a lot more matches or a lot more messages than you are, so you need to stand out more than just, yo, do you want to get a drink? You've got to be a bit more interesting to, like, be ahead of the pack. But, like, also, but yeah, you know, like, he basically, so then we started talking about street harassment and things like that, and he was just saying, no, that's just you that feels that way. And I was like, I just know that it's not. Like, I just know that it's not.
I know that, for example, it's definitely not. I know some girls who, although on the other side, I do know some girls who, it's just people who prefer to go out on a drink on the first time.
For sure.
So, no, but you're right. But you're right.
In terms of
like that is a factor that
the same way that like when I've gone on dates and stuff, like I will let my friends know where I'm going. I will check in at some point, and I will give them an update or whatever. And sometimes I'll say that that's what I'm doing when I'm like on the date or whatever, because I'm pretty sure by then they're not a murderer. Never been murdered so far. 100%. But success rate there. But And none of the guys that I've gone on dates with do that.
Yeah.
No one knows where they are. No, you know what I mean? Because there's not
Because
just that,
not all men are
that
murderers.
slight of that bit of what?
Because not all men are murderers.
No, but they're on a date with me. So, like, they're not worried that I'm going to murder them. Or they're not worried about the threat or whatever when they're going to meet a woman necessarily. Like, it's just not, but just that it's not, in the way that we're socialised and stuff, the fear is not there. Men just don't go around necessarily, like, walking around a little bit worried that someone might rape you.
Do you think that's more to say of the perception that women have of men rather than the perception that women
rather than the facts of what actually happens?
Because if you were to do it based on the general like there are rapists and that these are people that we have to deal with, though the general population of men is like is it a fear of men, or would you like what
well
is
no
it,
because it's not not that then they're never going out with any men because they might be a murderer, rapist or whatever. It's that we just take some extra precautions because statistically it's more likely.
It's more likely that a woman
will be in that situation where, and because just because in that dynamic there is a physical difference, there is a physical strength that guys have that I don't have. Even a small guy is a lot stronger than I am. And so this is why street harassment and stuff is distressing, and why it's not just a bit of fun, which is what it is for like often the guys who are doing it, where they're like, of course I would never act on it, I'm just yelling some stuff. But for women, there is the knowledge that even if I say no or whatever, he actually like physically would be able to, and there would be nothing I'd be able to do about it. So just to walk around having that knowledge that there's that physical difference a lot of the time, just means that you behave slightly differently in your life. You're just slightly more aware of that fact. You feel a little bit more vulnerable. So you take some extra precautions.
Covering all bases.
You're just covering up, because, it doesn't mean that I don't go on dates. Doesn't mean that I don't get into situations where something could happen, but I hope to use my personal judgment and stuff on that character. And also, risk. Like, you just have to take risks sometime, whatever. And it's usually fine. That's the thing, of course, it's usually fine. But, statistically, women are more at risk than men in these kinds of situations.
Well, in regards to...
And it kind of just affects, our way. But also, in fairness as well, it is almost the way that we have women being really afraid to walk home alone at night and stuff. That's almost a fallacy. The likelihood of someone, you might get mugged and stuff, but the likelihood of someone, jumping out at you in an alleyway and raping you is actually, a really small amount of the cases of rape, because almost all of them are actually someone that you know. So, in a way, there's that kind of aspect of it. It's not necessarily that, you should actually be as afraid as some people are about, in terms of how parents behave differently for their daughters coming home from a party compared to their sons and things like that. It's not necessarily that. It might be the people at the party that you should be concerned about, not the walk home. Do you know what I mean? And things like that. So there is some, I don't know, the kind of urban myth type things of it. And I would never discourage people from just trying to be safe or whatever. But yeah, I don't know.
In regards to the guy who prefers asking people if they want to go for a drink first, I think that's he can do that. He can try it. If he's gonna, like you said, 9 times 10.
That's the thing. As I was just saying, probably it's not going to be as successful as if you say start even a brief conversation just to give a bit of hey, I don't seem threatening and creepy. I'm able to have a normal conversation with you. Will often be enough, and then maybe they will hook up after that one. That one conversation or whatever, but just to straight out be and then be annoyed and be well, what's the problem? Why not just meet me for a drink? And it's well, because there's just a bit more going on. There's just a bit more that we consider that maybe he hadn't, kind of thing. And and I just know that is just how it is. That is true. And so when people like that argue against it, I'm not worried about it. I'm just well,
people can should be able to have whatever vice and fetish that they have, but they should also be accepting of the fact that not everyone has that
Exactly.
sort of point of view. Like, why is it that this person doesn't want me to lick their feet? Like it's
Yeah.
you have to understand not everyone has the same
Exactly,
pleasure,
and it
full
doesn't mean that
pleasure
it's
as you.
wrong
Yeah.
to like it or to not like it.
Exactly.
Like, and that's exactly. Same with like if you're gay or straight or in between somewhere or any of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not, if everyone's, I definitely like if everyone's doing what they want to be doing and not hurting anyone else, like, you know, directly with their actions, like if everyone's consenting and everyone's up for it, like I don't think there's any kind of like moral like thing around that stuff in terms of like just particularly with like sex and stuff, in terms of what you're saying about fetishes and things. I don't think there's any kind of like, well, just objectively this is wrong, apart from when things that we've decided as a society, like having sex with children, because we've decided they can't provide that consent, you know. So but when there's consent, like people should be able to do what the fuck they want. It's not up to the government or whatever to be like, we don't think that's cool, like, you know, fuck it.
You know,
like with monogamy and stuff.
Because most of monogamy is still like it's quite a new concept.
Really new
that was pushed by I guess like the Abrahamic religions in a way, mostly in Christianity, but for most of
even then, do you know what? Like only until very recently has it been expected for the men to be monogamous. Women have been expected to be monogamous for a long time, but men have always had concubines and mistresses, and like, you know, you would settle down in a couple. But men were often like, you know, that was widely accepted until very recently, that like men would also have sexual fulfillment elsewhere aside from their wife.
I mean, you definitely had different cultures that had
like I'm talking about like more here, like Western culture and stuff. But definitely there's like some that go the other way and things. But it's just interesting that for us, considering that monogamy isn't necessarily natural or whatever, there's different arguments for different things. But like, it's interesting that we've regressed to becoming more monogamous, where we're like both partners have to be monogamous, rather than maybe like the other side could be just as liberated and we could have like socially functioning monogamy and sex outside your marriage could be fine. That could have been how it went, like, but now it's more like if you have sex outside your marriage, then you're awful. Even in situations where people have agreed it, like, do you know what I mean? Like, people will still treat like open marriages and things like they are very, you know, very skeptical and very like, because it's somehow wrong.
Because we still have,
even if they both agreed to it, the people in the marriage are okay with it, but for some reason other people still think they can judge that, which is bizarre. Because
we still have that religious undertone to the way we do things in society. So when it comes to marriage, when it comes to why shouldn't you lie? It's like, say for example, I think I saw a study where there are a proportion of British people who say that they're Christians would say, yeah, I'm Christian, but when they ask, do you believe in, say, the virgin birth, do you believe in the transfiguration, do you believe in any things in the Bible, they will say, no,
do you believe that Jesus lived this time, or that he came back to life and all that kind of stuff? No, but they consider them Christian.
And then when you ask them why, it's because the most of the time the answer was because I want to see myself as a good person. So
the moral side of it, they feel like they learn something from that side of it.
So religion and particularly Christianity in Europe still has a monopoly on morality.
Exactly.
So when things, whether it's like homosexuality or things that contradict with that mindset, even though people do not technically strongly believe in those religious values,
they can still be like, it's against the morals laid out in the Bible, even if they don't live the rest of their lives like that.
It's just consensuality, like unconsciously in a way, because maybe because in the Bible, like you or any religious text, it could be like they would explicitly say that homosexual. So it's like I don't like this idea of homosexuals because it's ingrained in your mind.
Yeah, but that's the thing, isn't it? I think blindly following stuff because it's been planted in there or whatever is very dangerous. And I think unfortunately, like with the idea of religion being something that helps people like be good people, like great if you need that, but like at the same time you know, again, compassion. Like, it should be enough that you're like, this person will feel bad, not just because like I will somehow be punished, or like just something else tells me it's just objectively bad, when like this person seems happy enough with what they're doing, this person's been able to justify what they're doing, like, you know, like with homosexuality or something, like to just blindly be like, well, pretty sure that there's something weird about that. But like, I guess the thing with that is that like when it's so ingrained in the culture, like it's ingrained in like the language and like the jokes that we make and things like that, you have these like internalized, like these lingering things that will be a bit like, you'll have like a visceral reaction to stuff. You'll be like, oh, that is still weird. Like some people who aren't actually homophobic, like would never like, you know, try and stop gay people like having the right to same-sex marriage or like any of that stuff, might still, when they see two men kissing, have a little bit of like a, oh, like, you know, like a, I mean, compared to,
yeah, compared you can still find it weird, like in a way, because like like say for someone who's completely unhomophobic might say, because usually when people are in that situation, I believe anyway, that when you see things, we are still empathetic rather than compassionate, when you put yourself in their shoes.
Exactly.
So when you put yourself in the shoes, it's like, oh, I don't like that. I wouldn't
like to do that.
So then, like, exactly. You just imagine yourself in that.
But it's that thing again, isn't it? Of like, I wouldn't like to do that. And so we have that reaction, and then we have to make that next step to, but they want to do that, and that's okay. And even though we have these reactions where it's like, oh, if that was me, like, no thank you or whatever, it doesn't mean like, yeah, exactly, it doesn't mean that you have to. So like, don't try and stop them doing it because it makes you uncomfortable in some way, you know. So it is that cognitive dissonance that people have where they're like, well, I don't like it, so they shouldn't do it because I don't like it. And it's like, but it's not okay really. So these are all the things that I'm interested in terms of like understanding people and stuff. And I feel like Cradle is going to be a really interesting way for me to meet like so many different kinds of people who are doing all kinds of interesting things, have had like a wide variety of experiences, and it's really exciting that my job hopefully is going to be just like interacting with these people and connecting them and creating this community and stuff. And I just really want to be working on like loads of different projects all the time, and like with loads of different interesting people and things, and helping other people who are bored like get engaged with stuff and do some interesting things, and like so it's kind of all about that as well.
I think this is a really good idea, and like I wish, like it seems like you have everything put ready, all the ideas ready and put forward.
It's just all coming together now.
Exactly.
Like, you know, we're going to be going out and like interviewing people and like all kinds of stuff. It's going to be, it's all coming out. At the moment, what I'm doing is I'm collecting a bit of a backlog so that I can launch the website and it'll have some stuff on it. So then we can reach further afield in terms of the people that we contact and stuff, because obviously it's quite difficult at first where it's like immediately they're like, oh, what's your website or whatever.
That's what I was just about to ask you.
So once, like with a lot of our personal contacts and things that we're covering now, I'll be able to put them all up at the same time and then start contacting these other people, and then they'll be like, oh, like we get it now. Like we get what this is. Yes, let's be a part of it. Like, so.
But in the meantime, do you have like a place where people can follow you, like Instagram, Facebook?
Yeah, we're on Facebook at Cradle Community, on Instagram as well, and on Twitter I think it's at Cradle Community. As I said, like, I don't know, all the original content and stuff is going to be coming like in the next couple of weeks, and it'll be really exciting. At the moment it's just like me like half-heartedly posting interesting articles or whatever, but it's all gonna like be like coming together soon, so I'm really excited. That's
awesome. Well, thank you for coming on this podcast. That is
no problem, man.
Like, it was very enjoyable. Thanks for listening to the first ever episode of It's Not an Interview. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. You can follow Cradle Community on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Cradle Community. You can also follow It's Not an Interview on Facebook. We are on Soundcloud, and we should be, by the time you listen to this, we should be on iTunes and other podcast apps. If not, we should have that up and running very soon. Thank you guys for listening, and I look forward to having you back for the next episode as much as I'm looking forward to the next conversation I'll be having. But for now, I guess you can vibe out with some Oni.
o dia em que eu apareci no mundo. Juntou uma porção de vagabundo. 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 Da bom dia.